Welcome back, everybody. We're here on Chapter 10 talking about data and how to display data in graphics. This is a good chapter. You're going to be using graphics a lot in business, whether it's in reports or more commonly in presentations. Graphics, and here we're talking about tables and charts. Graphics condense a lot of numerical and statistical data down into a visual that's more condensed and concise and easier for the recipient to digest and read. So the lesson here is, as you're preparing your analytical report, when you have a lot of numbers, for example, if you're doing some comparisons on here's the schools and a comparison of their costs, you wouldn't want to put that cost information in paragraph form or in sentences because it's very hard for the reader to digest that information. Instead, you're going to put that cost comparison information, college A versus college B versus college C, into some type of graphic. It could be a bar chart, it could be a table. But as business writers, what you want to do is anytime you're starting to write about information that has data, numbers, statistics, you want to stop and ask, what's the right graphic for presenting this information? In business writing, time is money. We're trying to be concise and complete with our messages. So graphics can pack a lot of information into one visual that if we try to do it in paragraph form, it would take lots and lots and lots of text and be very hard for the reader to understand. So this is probably obvious for you. There's some wonderful tools nowadays, whether you're using PowerPoint or Google Slides. Both of them have graphics features that make it very easy to put together a pie chart or a bar chart. And basically, you're going to put your information into an Excel spreadsheet, or what I call Excel spreadsheet, but it's basically a grid with rows and columns, and you input your data, and it'll convert it quickly into some type of graphic, and you can choose what type of graphic you want to use. So in this lecture, what I'm going to be covering is the different types of graphics that we use in business messages and when to use which type of graphic, depending upon the data that you want to display. So if you get a minute, please check out the video on the front page here. If you're watching this in YouTube, then you might have to go chase down the URL on your own. But this is from careerbuilder.com. This commercial is several years old, but it's a funny video that shows how with a simple switch of data, the information can be displayed in a completely different way. So give yourself 30 seconds of entertainment and watch that video if you can. Okay, let's dive in. So 4 outcomes for this week's lecture. And again, going to graphics, how do we use graphics to communicate quantitative, meaning numerical information? And we want to know how to use graphics effectively and also ethically. So numbers don't necessarily lie, but graphics certainly can misrepresent that numbers. How we display a graphic can really kind of skew what the audience sees in that graphic. We want to make sure that our graphics are effective and easy to read and don't have a lot of junk to them. And item 3 is when to use the appropriate graphic for the information that we want to provide. And then item 4 on your learning outcomes is how to integrate graphics into documents, specifically your analytical report. So your analytical report is going to have graphics. At least you'll have to check the analytical report overview, but I think it's 6 graphics you'll need in the report. And how do you actually display those in the report correctly? We're going to learn about all that. All right, here goes. Here's your key terms for Chapter 10. Which ones do you need to know? You need to know all of them. So there is a lot of terms out of this chapter. Basically, knowing when to use which graphic for which type of data that you're presenting, for which communication situation you have, which is the right graphic for that situation. So when we talk about quantitative information, that is data. And nowadays, business, it's all about data, interpreting data, mining data, evaluating data, and presenting data in a way that the organization can understand and make decisions based on that data. So this is what we call the era of big data. And I encourage you to take statistics classes, and other classes are going to teach you how to look at data. And it's not that complicated, and you're going to rely on, you can count the types of graphics you're going to use on your two hands: bar charts, pie charts, tables, and some simple, what we call common language. And when we're presenting data, common language just means we're going to use some simple things like percentages to communicate our information in a way that's easy for the audience to understand. But you have to be able to take the data and put it into some type of graphic. So I'm not going to be asking you to mine a bunch of data, but you may have to put together some comparative graphics for your analytical report. Certainly a bar chart, or maybe even a table. And I'm going to talk about how to use those different graphics in different situations. When we talk about common language, that just means putting numbers, presenting them in a way that's easy to understand. Look at these 4 bullet points here. The top 2 are one scenario and the bottom 2 are another scenario. Which one's easier to understand? If you look at the first one, where it talks about 198 of 430 respondents, a percentage is easier to understand, right? 46% prefer more vacation time, roughly half. Approximately 1 out of every 2 indicates a preference for more vacation time. So again, almost half is easier to understand. So we want to use what we call in chapter 10 common language, percentages, ratios, easy terms that we can all understand. Ethical use of graphics. Well, you can distort your information, your data in the graphic that you're using, and kind of misrepresent the data that you're trying to represent. So before we decide, do we even need to use a graphic, you want to ask yourself, do we need a graphic to help clarify the information we're trying to convey? And in business, the answer is usually yes. So you're going to have less writing, less text in your analytical report, and more graphics. The common structure in your analytical report for working through your criteria points is going to be this. First, you're going to explain the criteria point. Our next criteria point is accessibility. For accessibility, we will be looking at the entrance requirement scores to access the graduate MBA program at these various schools. Okay, you told us what kind of data you're going to be looking at. And that'd be an opening paragraph. In the figure 1 below, we see how UCSD has the lowest entrance requirements of the 3 schools. And then you actually display the graphics. So you talk about what the criteria is in your first paragraph / sentence. In your second paragraph / sentence, you introduce the graphic that's going to be coming up, and you say as shown below in figure 1, or if it's on the next one, figure 2. Then you show the graphic. And the graphic typically has 4 parts to it. It has the title, it has the figure. The first graphic you show in a report is figure 1. The second one is figure 2, on down the line. You have your figure number, you have the title of your graphic, you have the actual graphic itself, a bar chart or a pie chart or a line chart or a table. And then beneath that you have the source, where the graphic came from, because it's numbers, so it came from a source. So all your graphics in your analytic report should have 4 elements: figure, title, graphic, and source. Anytime you have data that you need to convey to the audience, put it in a graphic. So for your criteria points, they're going to primarily have that structure of introduction of the criteria point, introduction of the figure that's coming up, then the graphic, and then following that, a quick closing paragraph that kind of reinforces who won that criteria point. So your criteria analysis is going to be very linear in your analytical report. So when we use graphics, we want to keep them simple, easy to read. They need to be consistent in how they're displayed. If you're going to the effort of putting together a graphic, in other words, the audience needs to be able to see it. Your analytical report is going to be a paper report, right, or digital paper. But more commonly in presentations, you're using a lot of graphics to convey information to the audience. I'm sharing with you in week 10, this week's lecture, an example of a PowerPoint slide deck that I did many years ago when I was at Jack in the Box. But you can see how it's stuffed full of graphics, and that's when I was a product manager for Jack in the Box, conveying to the executive management team, here's our research on breakfast consumption patterns, and here's my recommendation as the product manager on the products that we should be selling in our breakfast lineup and how we should feature them on our menu, and what the price points are and what products rose to the top with research, et cetera, et cetera. And it's a lot of graphics because it displays information in a more digestible way for the audience. So we'll look at that in a minute. Choosing the appropriate graphic to fit your objectives. So you can look at this figure in your text, and you see some of the common ones here. So I'm going to top line these, and then we'll go into more detail on each one. So the first one you see in the left of the slide is a table. So a table is kind of a go-to graphic that covers a lot of ground. So if you can't, let's say for example, one of your criteria points for your analytical report is the culture of the school. And if you're to compare culture, how do you compare culture? There's not really numbers to it, but there's a lot of information, right? So as you're looking at the culture criteria point, you want to look for some common threads that support that criteria point. What would be some common threads that relate to culture of a school? It could be what's the clubs and social components of the school. So you could have a social component. What are the athletic programs like? What are the career building job interaction components of the college? What percent of the student body lives on campus? So my point is, as you start looking for some common categories that support that criteria point, and as soon as you have those common categories, you can start putting that information into a table. Otherwise, you're going to be presenting a whole bunch of stuff. Here's some culture stuff about UCSD. Here's some culture stuff about USD. And here's some culture stuff about SDSU. The reader, me, looking at that information, doesn't understand how are you actually comparing all that information to clarify which college won the culture criteria point and why. So to make a bunch of information comparative, you can use a table. So a table is a wonderful way of taking what I call like less numerical, less quantitative criteria points and putting it into some type of table where you can organize that information. So you would have columns which represent your culture categories. We have athletics. We have social and clubs. We have percent of online campus housing, and maybe one other category. And then your rows would be the schools. And now you can simply take all that information, and instead of having a bunch of text about the culture of the schools, you could put it in a scorecard format, which is really what a table is. So when it came to housing on campus, we gave UCSD a 9 out of 10, we gave SDSU a 5 out of 10, and we gave USD a 2 out of 10. The winner here is UCSD. You get my drift? And then you can provide some additional information outside of the graphic to support that piece. So a table is good when you have a bunch of information that you have to display. It shows on this slide that to show exact figures, you can also use numbers, but if you have numbers, you're probably going to refer to one of the other graphics like a bar chart or a pie chart or a line chart because you have numbers, which makes it easier to create a graphic, a visual graphic versus a table. So that's the use of a table to organize a bunch of information into a way that's easier to see. The bar chart, the next one down there, that's the meat and potatoes graphic that's used a lot by business. The example they show here is what we call a stacked bar chart or a grouped bar chart. So this is, for example, maybe it's what's the postgraduate salaries of graduates from the MBA programs at the different schools. So if you look at this pretend graphic over on the first column of this slide, you see that there's 3 bar charts, and let's assume each bar represents a different school. And let's say the first one is USD, the second one is SDSU, and the third one is UCSD. And it looks like, it's kind of hard to see because it's micro, but that the third one, UCSD, is the winner on their total postgraduate salaries. And then maybe those little components within those vertical bar charts, we see the bottom is blue, and then the mid is magenta, and then it goes to some other colors, represents the composition of that salary, like how much of that is base salary, and how much of that is maybe bonuses and stock options, composing the total salary. Excuse me there, composing the whole salary number. So a stacked bar chart is basically like a pie chart within a bar chart. So bar charts are a wonderful tool. If you had to display all that information I just talked to you about, the postgraduate salaries of the 3 schools, and how that salary total compensation was composed of salary and bonuses, how much text would it take to display that in an analytic report if you just had paragraphs? It would take a lot of text, right? And it'd be very hard for the reader to understand. A graphic, on the other hand, packs all that information into a comparative way. So you want to use graphics in your analytical report because it's going to enable you to compare the schools on each criteria point, and we as the reader can visually see who won. Your third graphic type is a line chart. So a line chart commonly is used for sales or trends over time. If any of you fiddle around with the stock market and you go on a stock quote site and you look at the 52-week average, which is how high and how low has the stock price been over the last year, 52 weeks, you're going to see a line chart that moves that up and down. So it's trends over time. On the bottom of the left there, you also see a pie chart, which is another standard, often used graphic in business communication. So a pie chart represents the percent of a whole. And this is the graphic that many students use incorrectly. For example, if you were to talk about the total market share or the total number of students, let's go back to the analytical report example. The total number of students served, enrolled at these 3 different colleges, SDSU, USD, UCSD. And you put that in a pie chart. You'd see, wow, UCSD has 10,000 students annually in its MBA program. I'm sure it's not that high. The Rady School of Management is pretty selective and expensive. Let's call it 5,000. 5,000 students annually go through the Rady MBA Graduate School of Business. For SDSU graduate, the MBA program, they have 4,000. And for USD, smaller school, private, expensive, let's say it's 2,000 annually, right? If you put that in a pie chart, it's meaningless because what you're really trying to do is display it in a bar chart. That's not percent of a whole. Percent of the whole is here's all the enrollment of all the schools that have graduate MBA programs in San Diego County, right? And you would show the percent that was UCSD, maybe it's 20%, the percent that was SDSU, and collectively that pie chart would represent all of the students that are enrolled in MBA programs in San Diego County. That's a proper use of a pie chart because you're showing percents of a whole. But if you use a pie chart just to show enrollment of the 3 schools, it's meaningless. It's meaningless because it's not taking into account all the other schools. So the proper way to display that would be with a bar chart. So a pie chart is used when you're displaying the percents of a whole. Salary, if you're talking about, let's talk about MBA salaries, postgraduate MBA salaries. And you know, the average post-graduation person with an MBA degree is $120,000 a year. and out of that 120,000, they have a base salary of $90,000. They have an expense account of $5,000. They have bonuses of $10,000 and other travel and fringe benefits. The remaining, whatever that number is, $5,000. That would be an appropriate use of a pie chart, and we would see those percentages going along. So if that's confusing to you, send me an email and I'll clarify it further. Pie charts are used to represent a percent of a whole. Going to the right side of this slide, you see a Gantt chart. There's Gantt charts and PERT charts. Basically, these are, as it says, to track progress towards completing a project. So this is used a lot in project management, and there's some great software there now, like Microsoft Office has Microsoft Project. So you can go in and move one date and it moves all the other ones around. And it shows how long things are going to take. When my sons did their Eagle projects, they had to put together these Gantt charts that showed here's how much time it's going to take to source the materials and do the fundraising, and here's how much work we're going to do on the first day, and it was all laid out in a Gantt chart. You probably won't have a use for Gantt charts in your analytical report because you're not really presenting any information about a project timeline. Maps obviously show geographic relationships, and maybe one of your criteria points for your analytical report on comparing the schools is you're evaluating 3 schools, and you want one of your criteria points is proximity to home, because you're not going to be living on campus, you're going to be driving. So you could have a criteria point where you'd have a map and you could pinpoint where the schools are on that map, and we could visually see which one is the closest to your home, and that would satisfy a criteria point. Flowcharts show a process or a procedure. If you look at a company, their organizational chart, or org chart as it more commonly is called, it basically shows here's the CEO up top, here's all the VPs, here's the directors and the managers, and on down the line, and it's this big massive flow chart that shows who reports to who and how you move up and down the organizational ladder and the structure. That's an organizational chart. That's probably not something you're going to need in your analytical report as well. But if you were evaluating companies to work for and making a recommendation on which one's the best to work for and how quickly you could advance in your career, an org chart would be a wonderful tool to show we're going to start here as a coordinator of paperclips, and our goal is to move up to director of paperclips in the next 5 years. You could use a flow chart, an org chart, to display that. And of course, photographs. Photographs are wonderful. If you were presenting this analytical report with an actual live presentation, when you're using quote unquote PowerPoint, whatever you use, Google Slides, Slide Rocket, there's all kinds of tools. But photographs are a great way of adding some pizzazz and entertainment value to your presentation. So as you transition from one section to the next, you can have some nice photos that represent the industry that you're talking about, etc. You won't need any photographs for your analytical report. And in fact, to clarify this, photos do not count as graphics in your analytical report. They need to be comparative graphics that help you determine who won a criteria point. So don't put photographs in your analytical report. It's not going to satisfy the graphic requirements. Okay, the rest of this lecture talks about in a little bit more detail each of the different graphics, tables, bar charts, etc. I'm not going to lecture on each one of these slides. If you go forward about 3 slides, I'll get into bar charts and I'll show you a good versus a bad example. But what I want you to do is at this point, please have your textbook in front of you and use that to evaluate. They have examples of the different graphics in the textbook. So a table is basically columns and rows. It's like a grid, like a spreadsheet. And you want to have some structure. Your columns need to have headings. You don't want to show $100,000. You want to just show 100 and then list in your table numbers represented in thousands, so you don't have a whole bunch of needless zeros. Look at the examples in the book, please, for examples of tables. Same for bar charts. A segmented bar chart is, as I call it, a stacked bar chart where it has the percents of the whole, like salary, and then the components of salary within there stacked. So that's a very powerful graphic. It's got a lot of information packed into one bar chart. Pictograms are simply bar charts that have used pictures instead. When I worked at Jack in the Box, this is back when we still sold antenna balls, which are pictures of Jack's head, and we used to sell them at the drive-thru, and people could put them on their antenna, and we would have holiday versions and Halloween versions. And when I was a regional marketing manager, and I would go out and talk about sales, because we would do contests on stores for who could sell the most antenna balls. My bar chart would have antenna balls stacking up, right? So that's a pictograph. So you use a symbol or a picture to illustrate the actual bar chart. I'm going to skip this slide. You can read through this on your own. But let's actually look at a bar chart. So you see in the top right of this slide, I have a notation that says errors in scale and format. Let me explain what each of those are. Errors in scale is simply your XY axis. So we see here that this bar chart is displaying the number of units and how many units are sold by year. And it looks like in 2009, Kennedy Enterprises had a good year, and 2010 was their worst year. So errors in scale, we don't know if 100 is the total number for Kennedy Enterprises, and it looks like they have a data point at the top there that is meshing in with the title, and it's actually the total is 1010. So the actual number is higher than they have shown in their graph. That's an error in scale. It's your XY axis. So when you create a graphic, a bar chart, for example, the default setting is it's going to have your numbers start at 0 and go somewhere above what your highest number is. But you can change your scale on your graphic. It's kind of like when you pinch zoom something on, a picture that you're viewing on your phone, and you pinch zoom things open. You can change that. So I would probably, on this graphic, start the graphic at 300 or 400 and take it up to 1100. And then the bar charts would all fit within the graphic. Does that make sense? So that's the vertical scale. So that's issues with scale, and sometimes you might have a bar chart where maybe in 2010 their sales were 150, right, for Kennedy Enterprises in 2010. Right now we see that yellow, it was actually 640, but let's assume it was 150. That wouldn't even show on the graphic, right? It'd be below their starting point of 200. So we'd want to change the graphic starting point, the x-axis, the vertical axis, to say 100. And that way we could see the actual numbers. The bar chart would actually show up on the graphic. So you want to pinch zoom and kind of crop it and fit it in, and that's what we mean when we talk about scale. And you can set your data values on the x and y axis to do that when you create the graphic. Errors in format are simply how does it look. So scale is about, are you using the right data points to show the graphic, and errors in format are things like we have a title that is running into a data point. We've got some ugly colors here. You want your graphics to pop, so that means primary colors like red, green, blue, black, white on black, or black on white is like the highest contrast, right? So you don't want to have colors competing. Other than that, this graph is okay. The data points, the blue, we have blue bar charts against a blue background. So that's kind of competing for our eyes visually. So you want to clean it up. White backgrounds, primary colors, make the thing pop as much as possible. So this is an ineffective bar chart. A better version we see here, this bar chart has a more rich title. Housing bubble impacts inflation adjusted house prices, December 2005 to 2007. You can see this is a way back, but it's just an example. And we see the housing bubble in New York, and blue is 2005, and magenta is 2006, and your forest green, whatever that color is 2007. And we can see that obviously New York had its highest point in 05 and its lowest in 07, whereas Chicago had its highest in 06 and then the lowest in 07. LA was tied in 05 and 06 and its lowest in 07. So you can see how graphics tell a story very quickly that if we try to do it in text would take a long time. So this graphic has a title, it has the information laid out, and it's easy to read. I would suggest, if I was to make an edit, I'd probably just show those numbers on the left of 100,000 up to 700,000. I would probably show those just in 100 and say numbers are represented in thousands, and then you wouldn't have so many zeros on the left side. But this is acceptable as a clean graph. Much cleaner version, right? The white background, easy to read. Effective bar chart. Line charts, trends over time. So you can look for examples of this on the book. I'm not going to go into too much detail on this. We do have an example here. So what I like about this graphic is it has 3 of the 4 requirements. These are just samples from the book. In an analytical report, remember, please, you need those 4 components: figure, title, graphic, source. On this line chart example, we see the title, tuition increases have outpaced inflation. We see the graphic itself, current dollars versus consumer price index, adjusted dollars. And we see the source, College Board, 2009. Some of those previous examples didn't have a source. All of yours need to have a source. So line chart, we can see that obviously tuition increases are going up at a faster rate than inflation, and that is still true. I hate to say it, in 2018. So we've had a college tuition bubble. I think the private universities are going to feel that bubble burst pretty soon, but us more affordable community colleges are going to do just fine. Pie charts, again, percent of the whole. You start at 12 o'clock and go around with your biggest pieces of the pie first. As you go around, they get smaller to your smallest point. And again, it's percents of a whole. So here's a bad pie chart. Because we don't know what the percentages are, you can put the percentages right in. You see a legend there, and hey, city tax dollars, most money they spend is on education, and that's in the yellow. So they should move that legend over so it's not crowding up against the pie chart. We should have a source, and you can see how the red is smaller than the blue, and it should go biggest to smallest, and the kind of pinkish color is smaller than the green that follows it. So they're supposed to go biggest to smallest. So we don't have percentages. It's kind of busy with a lot of different colors, and the legend is crowding the pie chart itself. A better pie chart. I don't like that they've got 3 versions of blue on this, personally. But here we see sales by business segment, and they have a pie chart. This works as a pie chart because it's sales by business segment. And we see mortgage services have the bulk of sales at 67%, and then insurance, and then broker services, financial services, all others. So as we look at how much of, I'm assuming this is home sales. For home sales, how much are they getting of that, that when they sell a house, how much do they get? So the mortgage gets the most. That's about 67% of that sales price goes to a mortgage service that's going to service a loan. Insurance comes in, and they're getting about 14%, et cetera, et cetera. So, and then it has all other, which makes it comprehensive of out of all the total sales in the real estate market, here's how the different service providers, what they get as far as percentages. And we have a source. This graphic is actually complete. It has a figure, it has a title, it has the graphic itself, and it has the source. Those are the 4 components that we need. I'd probably change some of the colors. Like I said, there's too much blue. Maps, pretty self-explanatory. You can look for examples in the book. Here's a map example. So it's going to be a powerful tool, and this does count as one of your graphics in your analytic report comparing schools. If you want to compare locations close to your house, that would satisfy this. Flowcharts. Flowcharts are used a lot in processes presentations. You don't need it for the analytical report. Org charts are commonly used in business presentations also. So this leads us to including graphics in text, meaning in a report, or what we call embedding a graphic in a report. So I am providing you with a sample analytical report. So if you go back to the modules view in Canvas and you go to the Start Here menu or the Welcome to the Course menu, once you click on the Welcome to the Course page, you're going to see a section called Course Resources. When you click on Course Resources, within that page, you'll see a selection for Analytical Report Resource page. You click on that resource page, and that's going to take you into the analytical report, and there's a sample analytical report in there where you'll see a student's report from a prior semester, a different topic, and how they actually displayed that information of putting the graphic within the text of the report. As I mentioned before, it's going to be in the criteria section where you're going to be using graphics the most, and the flow is going to be a quick introductory paragraph explaining the criteria point and what data you're going to be using to evaluate that criteria point, and then introducing the graphic as shown below in Figure 1, how UCSD has the lowest entrance requirement scores, then the graphic itself, and then a quick summary paragraph after that. This, as you can see from the graph, UCSD is clearly the winner with the lowest entrance requirements of a GMAT score requirement of 647, whatever. So that's the flow for including graphics in the text, the body of your report for your analytical report. And this slide gives you a couple examples of how to introduce the graphic in your report. So the second one is better. The one above it is okay too. As shown in Figure 1, if it was your very first graphic, about 2/3 of consumers prefer to shop in suburban areas rather than the city. You would just swap this out and use the language you're using for your analytical report. As shown in Figure 1, comparing entrance requirements for the 3 colleges, UCSD had the lowest requirements, and then you show the graphic. So you actually want to put the, as shown in Figure 1, the reference, the pointer to the figure, which is the graphic, at the end of your introductory sentence/paragraph. So the second example is the best one here because it gives you the information you need first and then says where it is in the report. Look at the sample report that I put in the analytical report resource page for examples of this. Okay, so that's most of this chapter. Just a couple pop quiz questions here. Which graphic would be best to show Starbucks quarterly sales over a 5-year period? Trends over time, sales over time. The answer would be B, a line chart. Next question, which of the following is an example of an effective talking title? A talking title is simply when the title of your graphic isn't just something like entrance requirements of colleges, but UCSD wins with the lowest entrance requirements amongst the 3 colleges. That would be a talking title because it actually explains what the graphic is displaying as opposed to just being a neutral title. So for this example, which of the following is an example of an effective talking title? the answer would be C. U.S. interest rates decline January to April. So you see the difference there. So you want to try to use talking titles, make your titles informative where they actually kind of explain what's going on with the graphic. All right, that covers graphics, chapter 10. I know it might sound like a bit of a yawner topic, but it is actually really important that you understand how to use graphics correctly, because they're going to be a tool you use all the time in business for presentations, for communicating data. You need to know how to create graphics, and you need to know how to read those graphics. So that's what graphics are all about. They summarize quantitative data. It helps simplify the data that you're trying to present. You want to know how to choose the most appropriate graphic, and you need to know how to integrate graphics into text when you're doing an actual written report versus a presentation. Okay, so your step 2 of the analytical report is one of your assignments for this week, week 10. So check that assignment out. And again, you can always go back to the analytical report resource page, which is part of the course resources page, which is underneath the welcome to the course main page at the top of your modules view on Canvas. All right, thanks for listening. Good luck.